I saw this awesome video from Luke Forsyth, and this is a great breakdown of what it means to use different cameras at different price points. I'm not going to show you the video here. If you want to go check it out, you probably have already seen it. It's got almost 100,000 views, more than that, I think, at this point on his channel. So you can go check it out over at Luke Forsyth. He's got a great channel, lots of cool content. Seems like a really nice guy, very charismatic, very easy to watch and listen to. And I like these tests because a lot of work goes into making videos like this. Having done video content like this before, where you're just putting a bunch of effort into a YouTube video, it is nice to see that, a lot of people have enjoyed it and seen it. But I also wanted to go beyond this video because I think Luke goes into some of he addresses the goal of his video, which was just to test these Sony cameras at different price points versus the Arri Alexa 35 and seeing, are you really getting more by paying more? Are you getting the most out of these cameras by spending more money? And Luke has his own way of shooting. He's a documentary style camera operator, cinematographer. I don't know necessarily what he considers himself, but he is using the camera to make content. Well, I think a lot of us are probably in that same boat. Maybe you're here for editing or something else, but I think a lot of us appreciate cameras, cinematography, and just the operation of these devices. So it's cool to see him using something like the Sony FX9 on location, out in the snow, out in the wilderness, putting it through the elements, and obviously having some of those great features for documentary filmmakers like built-in ND filters. That's one of the biggest things I can say that I miss from hybrid style cameras, and one of the reasons why I think it would be amazing for one of these manufacturers to actually put built-in electronic NDs into these hybrid photography devices, just because I think NDs are that much of a benefit. They're so incredibly useful in any scenario, even if you're shooting indoors and controlled light and you don't need the ND filters and you just turn them off, to have them the moment you step outside or you step into an environment where it's too bright or you just want to control your other aspects of exposure. But I'm getting off on a tangent. The main crux of this video is testing. Does price point matter? Does the cost of the camera matter? And then beyond that, which one is going to be the right tool for the job? Because if you want some slight spoilers for the video, I really do recommend you go check it out. But obviously the Alexa 35 wins. It has the most dynamic range. It has, the cleanest shadows. It's got the most, filmic look and texture. But obviously it comes with a huge price tag associated with that and a lot of downsides, as Luke goes through in his video, talking about the kind of more proprietary hardware. You got to spend more because it's all got little bits and bobs that are meant for the Alexa and don't really play nice with other things. And you got to spend more money just on the accessories, as well as the fact that the Alexa 35 is bigger, it's heavier, is bulkier, all of that, where he ends up wanting to kind of stick with the Sony model of having a great documentary run and gun film camera, which is awesome. I think that's great. I think that's what we kind of all want, that perfect tool for the job. And all of our jobs are slightly different. We're all slightly different. So for me, it's the hybrid model. That's what I love. The cameras that just fit in the palm of your hand. You can take them anywhere. You can get all sorts of crazy angles. For Luke, it's something like an FX9 or maybe the Burano, as he's deciding what he's going to get into the future. But what I wanted to talk about with this video in particular is it's very easy to say the Alexa 35 is better because obviously it has more dynamic range. However, the test scenario that he sets up really is a torture test of the camera, basically shooting out of an open window. It's the classic example of, can my camera expose for the highest of high highlights while still retaining the shadows? And what it ends up happening is he creates an image that I would say is aesthetically unpleasing. It's quite ugly. And for the sake of a test, that's totally fine. This is not a criticism of Luke and what he did. Clearly a lot of effort went into making this video. Again, I respect and admire anyone who's willing to put this much effort into making a YouTube video that only helps us all out. But I wanted to point out that these type of tests can be a little misleading for people when they're sitting there thinking, oh, the Alexa is clearly superior because it has more dynamic range. Yes, obviously. But how many times would you actually want to take full advantage of that extra dynamic range in creating a shot like this? Because at the end of the day, if it's kind of aesthetically unpleasing, if it's kind of ugly, it's not perfect. And again, I know it's for a test, but you clearly wouldn't want to do that on a proper shoot. You would make it look nicer. And almost always a nicer, more pleasing image is going to have contrast. It's going to have depth, texture, dimension, color, all of these things. And it's not a flat, perfect highlights to perfect shadows kind of smudgy, smeary, gross blah, kind of muddy image, if you will. Now, are there benefits to having the most dynamic range? Obviously. But don't think that that's something you'll actually take advantage or actually need, because in the other tests that Luke goes into, the cameras are all nearly identical, which is much more likely what you would actually be doing, whether you're shooting outside or indoors. There's very few setups that have something that requires 17 stops of dynamic range that actually look good. So even if you could do it, would you want to ever do that? And the chances are probably not. If you watch almost any movie, any good, decent cinematography, movie, go look up great cinematography. There's contrast. There's highlights that are blown out. There's shadows that are crushed, that you can't see what's in the blacks, and you can't see what's outside the window. Stuff can be blown out. Stuff can be clipped on either end of the spectrum, but the aesthetic, pleasing nature of the image usually comes down to a lot of other things beyond dynamic range. Dynamic range is helpful. I'm not saying it's not. I don't want to have a camera that has 5 stops of dynamic range, but also just know that almost any modern camera is going to get the job done if you're taking into consideration all the other factors that go into making an image look good. Putting a camera through a torture test almost never gives you a good-looking image. And I don't think that's what Luke was going for. I'm just saying, draw that conclusion. Do you need to spend extra money to have the best camera for a function that you won't actually really use, or even if you did use, could end up hurting your image? A lot of times the restrictions of these devices come with the benefits of forcing us to be more creative, to be more experimental, to work around some of those technical limitations. This has been true and always has been true forever. Every camera, every device, every lens, every piece of equipment has quirks or functions or limitations. You just can't do certain things because of the physical optics, or because of the battery, or because of the memory card. There's always limiting factors. And all of those limitations force us to be more creative, to still make something that looks good. To have unlimited technology, unlimited capability, unlimited awesomeness doesn't always make good looking images. In fact, I think that's what a lot of people struggle is they buy a Red, they buy an Arri, they buy a high-end Sony, they buy something expensive thinking it's going to solve their problems, and it ends up being just like everything else they've ever used, with maybe a higher price tag associated, because it's almost never down to the camera. And so if you're, I don't know, working in Hollywood, you have the budget to spend to get the Alexa 35, go for it. Right? If that's what you want to spend your money on, by all means, you technically have the best device. But I wouldn't want any newcomer, someone who's just getting out of film school, or who wants to get into the industry, or who wants to make YouTube videos, thinking that their camera is lesser than, or that they can't do the things that the Alexa can do because it just has so much more dynamic range. I don't want people to take that away from this type of video, thinking that what they have is inferior or not capable of producing good images, because it's just not the best. You don't have to have the best, most expensive camera. And I think this test ends up showing that in other scenarios where almost every shot, aside from the different color variations between the different Sony models and how the Alexa renders color, it all kind of looks more or less the same. And it's hard to tell, even for a professional cinematographer, and especially for the regular person who's just watching content. Most people aren't looking at the dynamic range of every single frame of every video they watch. They're scrolling on TikTok, they're scrolling on Instagram, they're clicking around on YouTube. Maybe they're going to the movie theater, and there you get the real cinematography, the professional, amazing stuff. And almost all the time it has contrast. It has depth and dimension, highlights that are blown out, shadows that are crushed, right? That's usually what ends up looking good. Not to have just everything contained in this perfect 0 to 100, spectrum of your luminance values. To smush everything in to that range, while is technically impressive, is almost never what you aesthetically would want to actually show on screen. I just watched Mission Impossible 3. I know it's a little dated now, but I'm going back through all the Mission Impossible movies, films I love. And Mission Impossible 3 is incredibly contrasty. I'm not saying I like the look necessarily. I could, appreciate a little bit more. But even something like that, that's not that old. I think that movie came out in 2006. You know, that's a J.J. Abrams, Tom Cruise film, and it's real contrasty. And then, of course, I watched Mission Impossible 1. That's its own beast. Mission Impossible 2, you know, they're all different, but you pick any movie from any genre, from any franchise, whatever. And they're very rarely, in fact, hardly ever, if they're so flat that they've got, you know, this amazing dynamic range all contained within the image, it probably looks a little bland, a little boring, a little dull. And I think that's been the problem, actually, with modern movies and TV shows. And these cameras have become so great that we're chasing, you know, saving the highlights, saving saving everything. Let's save it all. And we end up with something that's a little bit underwhelming, more like, you know, a stress test of a camera, where it's not about how beautiful the image is. It's more about the technical feat of, did it capture it all? And so what it comes down to, and what Luke concludes, and what I conclude, and what everyone will conclude, is the cliche of pick the right tool for the job. Choose the tool that matters most to you, that gives you what you need. And that's so obvious and so cliche and so redundant because everyone says it, that it's almost like something's missing. There has to be some secret beyond this. No, we're tempted by the more expensive stuff because it just feels like it ought to be better. And it technically is better. But also, don't ever use that as an excuse. Don't ever use it as a reason to complain about what you're producing. There are 1,000 other ways to make good-looking images as opposed to just spending more on a camera. If it's built-in ND filters, that's your deal breaker, that's the thing that matters most to you, then get a camera with internal ND filters. If it's, I can't imagine why it would be 17 stops of dynamic range, but if it is 17 stops of dynamic range, get the Alexa 35, that's fine. If it's having a camera that can fit in the palm of your hand, get a hybrid. You know, there's so many reasons to choose one thing over another, and there is no right solution. But don't ever think that the cheaper thing is inferior just because it technically can't reproduce a stress test perfectly. I know no one thinks that, but subconsciously we might all feel it a little bit. And that's kind of why I wanted to follow up. You can do your stress tests. You can prove that scientifically these devices are better. But aesthetically, creatively, if you have the budget, spend it. If you're making Hollywood movies and money doesn't matter, go wild, go nuts. Get the absolute best. And then watch how all that footage is color graded to look more like what you could get with an FX3, which also has made movies at this point. You don't need to spend the most to get the best result. And that is so obvious and it is so cliche that it's unfortunate that we spend all this time making content just to reaffirm ourselves that truth is still true in today's day and age. Until technology changes, until we fundamentally are capturing content in a different way outside of the sensor, you can make anything look good in today's day and age with any camera from the past 5 years, certainly from the past 5 years, but probably within the last 10 years, you can still make great looking video or photo with almost anything that's come out. Price point, I think there's a little shame, a little insecurity that people feel when they're first getting into the industry thinking, I don't have the best thing. It's not the expensive one. It's not the Alexa. Ugh. And they dismiss their own talent, their own ability because they don't have the thing that's more expensive that puts on the show. When in fact, the show is the skill, the talent, the ability, the experience behind the camera that matters most. And almost any professional cinematographer will tell you exactly that. Oh, who cares what the camera is? I can make it look good. But when people are first getting into the industry, when they're watching YouTube content, they're excited about learning like, oh, what's the best? And they're chasing the dream. The dream can be the thing you buy on Amazon that's shipped to you the next day. It doesn't have to be the $100,000 mortgage payment just for a camera. That's a pretty good truth that I think is worth reaffirming because it is so true. It is so fundamental. And if you can internalize that and love what you do regardless of the tool, of the technology, if you can make things work with what you have, with the cool compact, like that's what I love. I love doing it with the hybrid camera and knocking people's socks off with how good it looks and something that, fits right in the palm of my hand. If you need to show up with the crew and all the stuff to put on the show for the client, that's valid. That's a model. But I think it's also equally impressive and just as fun to have something that looks like you're taking pictures and you get incredible cinematic masterpieces from it. Because if you just use it in the right way, anything can look amazing. People will do this with, their iPhones, their little point and shoot cameras. It really is a testament to how capable devices are these days. So just always remember that, never forget it. And I don't know, be happy with what you have, but also realize where it's worth investing your time, money, resources. Is it worth chasing the most expensive camera for the absolute best image quality? Maybe for some people, but I think for most people, is being proud of the work you do, regardless of the tool you're using.